Welcome to the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, where we explore the impact of EdTech on the student experience with engaging, fun, and relevant conversations that honor the wide range of work happening all across the higher ed ecosystem. I'm your host, Dustin Ramsdell. I've been working in and around higher ed for the past decade, focused on student support and digital experience. Join me every week for discussions with some of the best minds in education technology. We'll be bringing you their perspectives on how digital transformation is reshaping the way we recruit, engage, and graduate learners. You'll hear firsthand accounts of how institutional leaders are developing their strategy, as well as get deeper on the stories of how these EdTech tools are being built to foster better student outcomes. With that, let's get to today's episode. Welcome, everyone, to what I'll call kind of a special report episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast. We're recording this one, getting it turned around real quick to analyze a recently released report from Genzabar Spark 451 talking about graduate intenders, the graduate intenders survey, talking about kind of how prospective graduate students are searching, making decisions around their programs of choice. So really good stuff. Really, excited. Always excited for these kind of conversations that provide kind of a grounding in data. Some inputs from the folks that our institutional leader, members of our community are interacting with every single day. So we will start as we always do, though. Marshall, if you want to kick us off by introducing yourself, give a brief overview of your professional background, and then we'll get into more of our conversation here.
Yeah, for sure. Dustin, thank you. My name is Marshall McClung. I serve as one of Spark 451's client strategists. So I'm on the front lines with our clients, with our partners each and every day, working with them to help them achieve their goals. And so we work with schools, on the traditional undergraduate side, but we have a lot of partners who are also focused on that graduate recruitment space as well. I got started back in admissions in 2011, right after I graduated college. I think like most people who go into that profession, I fell into it. Our dean of admission and I, my alma mater, were close. And, I didn't exactly know what I wanted to do when I got out of college, and there was an opening in the office. And so being able to tell stories and work with students through that process brought me a lot of joy. I did that for about 3 years. I spent a couple years on the high school side doing college counseling as well at a small little school down in Florida. Love that, right? Complete change of pace to work with students and their families to find their right fit school. So I did that for a few years and then wound up back on the admissions side. About the past 5 years, I've been on the vendor side, working with institutions to help them achieve their goals. Again, specifically in the graduate admission space. So this type of data, these types of surveys are really fascinating to me, especially to see how those trends change over time.
Yeah, I mean, that's always like, when you see, organizations that kind of do this work consistently, like the change over time is always interesting. But then just like, for me, that idea of like kind of the grounding of these is sort of like, getting checked on your assumptions, like a lot of people kind of just anecdotally make a lot of, maybe bold claims about one thing or another, and just either like the extent to which that is actually true, or maybe sometimes when things are just like not true that we thought were true, and all that kind of good stuff. So, excited to get into this, but just in case folks aren't aware, if you want to also just briefly summarize, talk a bit about the work that Genzabar Spark 451 does, and then I guess we'll use that as kind of a segue into the breaking down the survey report.
Yeah, absolutely. So Genzabar, right, kind of a leading provider in the ERP, SIS, tech solution space for institutions. We work with over 1,400 campuses worldwide. Genzabar acquired Spark a couple of years ago. And so I like to think, I think as many of us do, that Spark 451 is that marketing arm of Genzabar, being focused on that tech CRM service for many institutions. We are that division that is helping make sure that we're working with those institutions to identify new markets, kind of front to back full funnel marketing. So, Spark 451, our specialization is that higher ed marketing space. So whether it is working with institutions to streamline their tech processes, if it's working to capture and identify leads for them through digital marketing campaigns, e-communication campaigns, tech campaigns, you name it, right? We're going out there and working with those schools to find the right fit students for them and help nurture those students through that student journey or that student life cycle all the way up into enrollment, right? That's what we do.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that work in and of itself is, I think, always kind of constantly evolving and changing, and just a lot of things certainly around like kind of AI search and whatever. I think that's all kind of blended into the survey report is kind of seeing how much or to what extent, kind of how people are using any variety of conduits to find out, information about the, programs of choice, institutions of choice, or just analyze their options and all that kind of stuff. But and I think that's the idea again, like that area, given that there's no shortage of different platforms that prospective students might use, what are the things that they care most about and all that, is in the report. And I think those are just things, that are, constantly in flux, like all across the board of, all those things that I had mentioned. So if you want to talk a little bit about how this graduate intender survey kind of came about and kind of the summary of like what it entails, and then we're going to dig a little bit deeper.
My admission background's in undergraduate recruitment, right? I never really spent any years on the grad recruitment side. So the analogy that I make often is, when you think about where a sophomore is in their search process, or where a junior in high school is, or where a senior is, it's a very linear path for them. I know how to speak to a sophomore in high school and how to speak to a senior in high school and the things that they're considering at those points in their search timeline. For graduate students, right, it's a little different, right? You want to make sure you understand your market before marketing to that market. And so, if we think about prospective graduate students, they are either in their senior year of college and looking to go straight into a grad program. They might be a few years out, early career, looking to advance it or make a shift in it. And then you've got folks who maybe are a little bit more mid-career, right, and looking to go into a different field, and they need that degree or that credential to make that pivot. So the goal really, and the reason for doing this type of surveying and research in that market, is to better understand what motivates them. How do they search? How are they searching for schools? What are their preferences? And truly, what are their reasons for pursuing that degree? Because if you can speak to the why, right, then you're going to have a better, you're going to have a better ability to get through to that audience, right? So it's all about making sure we understand so that we can then speak to their true needs, desires, and ambitions.
Yeah, and I think that like it's kind of the two big buckets for me. Kind of was just kind of skimming over the report and everything was like, it's that right message, like what do these people care to know, and all that, and like the right mediums, the right platforms, and all that. So if you can get kind of the right message in the right place, and then certainly at the right time, which I think is always going to be a harder target, to know necessarily. That's why you kind of have to just like kind of keep the right efforts going consistently and stuff. But I think we'll break down those two big areas, like what are we saying and where are we saying it. So we'll start with the what. So from your perspective, I kind of have my own sort of like inklings, I guess, of like what I'm seeing and hearing and all that. But I'm curious your take. How do these results affirm trends around program relevance and value propositions? Like that idea of like what a prospective graduate student is looking for, finds valuable, finds relevant. Do you feel like what you saw in the report results was affirming to you, or was it maybe surprising?
No, I think it kind of aligns. So again, I'll go back to this analogy really quickly, right? For an undergrad student, they might just be looking for the right, like I'm going to channel my inner Gen Z here and say, looking for the right vibes, right? Like they're looking for that school that feels right. I think when we really take a look at graduate students, there's a significantly greater level of pragmatism that they have, right? They're focused on what is this career outcome going to be for me? Right? What is that return on investment going to be for me? How am I interacting with professors to help advance my career or pivot into a new career? So again, I think, when we're thinking about this audience and what we saw in the survey results is that those things were what students said they were looking for when searching for that graduate degree. So again, return on investment, that career impact, flexibility is a huge component with this audience, right? Again, they're not spending 4 years necessarily on campus, living in housing, and creating these memories that you get in your undergrad years. These folks might have a career that they can't abandon, and so having the flexibility to do it on their own terms is important. And again, something we can get into that the data suggested.
It keeps coming up in a lot of different contexts for me, I guess. The idea of affordability, like that's like one topic, because I think there's like that broad idea of like accessibility is certainly like modality is going to be a part of that, cost is going to be a part of that, length is going to be a part of that, like all these sort of things go into sort of like, is this program and degree and stuff like accessible to me? And I think you would imagine like those kind of like the ranking of those things that enable accessibility are always going to kind of shift, I think, just in terms of like where's the economy at and where, and all those things. And maybe if you do target, like a particular audience of like, we're looking for, adult learners who are, 35 years old or older, it's like any of those kind of things, it's always going to shift. But I think they're always going to be kind of like in, the top kind of, I guess I would say top three, I guess, of like my guess, and that, that idea of like, did this affirm or not, in terms of like my guesses, if you like force me to choose or whatever. So I think it's that idea that like a lot of those were, from what I was seeing, kind of implicit in it and are kind of the markers, I think, of the programs that are serving today's adult learners successfully and everything. And even something else, I guess, like speaking of, I guess, like, vibes or whatever, just that idea that like at this point too, obviously like, again, that's a lot of what this report goes into, but like, institutions are marketing themselves. There's spreading a message. I think they're, likely, leaning into a lot of these things, but even just like the word of mouth, or, you've had enough people probably kind of in this era kind of go through and graduate and, see the value and the impact and that sort of thing. Like, I feel like just that idea that like, I guess where we are now, I'm sure there's maybe, since there is that ability to kind of cycle through maybe messaging and all that, like it's kind of like everything is sort of colliding, I guess. Like the institutions are seeing what's working, they're maybe even getting nice little sound bites or anecdotes or testimonials from students, and the students, they know what they're looking for or whatever. Like, I guess it's just like, because I'm thinking through, I guess, what in terms of the messaging and sort of affirming, like I didn't necessarily see anything surprising, but I guess it's like reassuring to see that like these are the things that maybe are persisting and are found to be resonating by the audience. Because like, at a certain point, the pendulum does eventually return to the middle, like the idea of like what's important to students, institutions recognize that, they're messaging that, and it kind of like, you can maybe then get into a little bit more of kind of like the nitty gritty or kind of the nuts and bolts of like, the exact flavor of like, okay, how do you do your online courses versus just like, we offer online courses, like, but there's going to be a kind of a spectrum there, or like,
of course,
the exact cost and different things of like, well, I'm willing to pay more if I'm getting more, like not just the sticker price or something. I guess that's all sort of like what's sorting in, is that like now, like the gap maybe between in terms of the messaging, like there's more of a match there. So then that is the idea the institution can maybe have the ability to kind of get into more detail or something. I don't know. Like, I guess that this is all just sort of like, kind of shooting from the hip a little bit here, but curious just that idea of like, maybe that there's the alignment between the messenger and the audience that's being reached now, because I feel like these types of things that are important just seemed a little like stickier, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, well, and to your point on it being, it always comes back to what we thought, right? I truly think these types of surveys, again, to your initial point, do help reaffirm what we suspect to be true in the market. And this is probably the comment that would upset many graduate faculty members, but I think is the reality is for many students, it's a means to an end, right? And that end may be career advancement. That end may be career pivot. But the reality is it's something that I think many of these students take seriously. We had asked students what type of messaging resonates most with them in digital ads, right? And the vast majority of them said financial, right? And I think what I infer from that is, most undergraduates have taken on some form of debt to get through their undergraduate degree. And they want to make sure that career is then helping them pay off that debt, in a significant amount of time in a reasonable way. I think to then say, okay, well, if you're considering that graduate degree, is the return on investment really there, right? And so we want to make sure that institutions are speaking to that, right? How are you, what does that middle income, your mid-career income look like in the profession you're considering? And again, how they're searching, we've seen evolve, in this cycle in particular, and happy to get into those details. But it's definitely interesting what we saw in this one.
All right, time for a quick break to share something big happening this summer. If you're tired of the same old conference buzz and want real playbooks and real momentum, you need to make it to Charlotte, North Carolina for Engage Summit 2026, this June 15th to the 17th. Engage Summit is where you can take the next step toward building the agentic campus with strategies you can start implementing today, workshops that sharpen your skills, and a community dedicated to transforming how higher ed supports and serves students. Whether you lead enrollment, student success, marketing, or tech, this is where higher ed stops talking about AI and starts implementing it. And the best part? Enrollify listeners like you can grab a ticket for 50% off. Yes, half off. Head to engage.element451.com and use code DUSTIN50. That's DUSTIN50. Register now and build what's next. Now, let's get back to the show.
You're getting at that idea of like the eye rolls from the faculty would be that maybe like the nuances and the like, you know, details of like the courses and all that kind of stuff. Like that is obviously going to be tough to convey maybe, you know, through some sort of like concise eye-catching message or whatever. And like at most, I think it would be this sort of like nebulous, intangible, like the brand or the name recognition or sort of, you know, the prestige, perceived or otherwise of like an institution that could, you know, sway somebody. But otherwise, yeah, like it's important for students where it's like, hey, you know, like I know that I need this to get to where I want to go. So it's almost like subconsciously they're acknowledging like, I need to learn things. Like there are things I don't know and whatever. And I'm going to trust that you know what those things are and whatever. Like, cause it's almost maybe like a known unknown or unknown or whatever you want to say. Yeah. But yeah, so then it ends up being like, well, how long is this going to take me? Is it going to fit to my schedule? Like the dollars and cents make sense, pun intended there, you know, a little wordplay. So, and those are things that I think can be kind of like conveyed and almost like box checked of like, cool, I can get this done in a year. You know, my employer will cover up to a certain dollar amount. You know, the courses like are, you know, I may be looking for completely asynchronous, you know, self-paced, whatever. Or, you know, and like in some of those, again, that's where you're getting into where like we offer online programs. It's like, cool, let me just double check. Like, are they doing live sessions or is it like I can do it all at my own pace? Or like, are there hybrid components? Because actually I would like to like come to campus, you know, maybe once or twice or something. Like those at least kind of quick little, you know, clarifying details, again, can be conveyed pretty well, you know, through all this messaging. But like, yeah, it's going to be hard to like get into like, you know, the numerous learning outcomes of the, you know, dozen plus courses you have to take over the course of a year and a half or whatever, you know, like, so that is kind of the bummer where like the content and like the, you know, the stuff that like the faculty would, you know, get all jazzed about, but then it's like, you know, that's maybe, I guess, then almost like the cherry on top of like, hey, it fit the bill in all those other regards. Now I get to be in my classes. This is amazing. This is so great. I'm learning so much. And my, you know, my classmates are, you know, super cool and whatever. So I don't know, you know, I want to like placate, I guess, the faculty, but also knowing that like,
sure,
if we're
it's a
going to
delicate
recruit in
balance.
the right way, the message needs to be the right message, and it needs to be kind of be able to kind of distill down and capture it in a nice, you know, concise package.
One, two, it's where is the student in their process? If you're at the very top, like if you're just beginning this search, maybe it's a little too weedy to get into those types of detail, right? The basics do matter then. I would say that, you know, hey, you've gotten that applicant, right? We know graduate students typically are applying to fewer schools on average than they are at the undergraduate level. So, you know, I think it's one of those spaces where they spend a whole lot longer in that search window doing their research in the background before really raising their hand. But we did find, I think, you know, 78% of those that we surveyed are ready to enroll in the next 12 months. So once they are ready, they're ready to move. And I think what that speaks to is the need for institutions to be reactive to that quickly. And so often I see, you know, they have processes and there are barriers and roadblocks. And it's like I had an old colleague I used to work with who always said, once you've got them, they're yours to lose. And so if that student has done their search for however long, once they've come to you, that's when you've really got to be quick to react, quick to respond, quick to answer their questions and move them through that admission process as efficiently as you can. It's their expectation, right? If Amazon can deliver something to you in 12 hours, are you able to respond to a student's inquiry or email in a similar amount of time? Maybe not, but that's kind of the goal, right?
Yeah, good points there on both sides, I think is, you know, recognizing where people are in the funnel in terms of submitting applications, you know, are they accepted and just need a deposit? And like, that's, you know, sometimes, where you can kind of compel some people in terms of some of those other like much deeper, weedy, kind of wonky aspects of a program. But then some of those things around any efficiency gains that you can make on, just general responsiveness to questions and requests for information, but then also in terms of like application decisions, because it could be like, well, if we take like 3 months to get back and say like, hey, you're accepted, it's like, yeah, these people are ready to like, start within the near future because they need to kind of like plan their life around presumably a lot of different details of their kind of like working and personal lives and whatever else. So I think, all points well made. And in terms of now where these messages are reaching people, the search process of prospective graduate students, I think are in flux. I think that was like acknowledged in the report, is that you kind of are seeing a little bit of like kind of flipping and, pretty dramatic reordering, because I think there's certainly, the AI front and those kind of tools and platforms. But then I think just the now where there's kind of, when it comes to like social media stuff, like it's TikTok is its own kind of beast versus maybe LinkedIn versus, like they're just very different versus all kind of feeling like kind of the same. Like now it's like you kind of are choosing your own adventure in a very distinct way. I feel like it comes to social media. So I think, just that idea of like what, who's kind of setting themselves off ahead of the pack and, in that regard. But so I won't, lead you too much, but these the search process, in terms of the platforms of choice, certainly in flux, according to these results. So what do you think is the cause?
The majority of graduate students these days are falling into the bucket that I fall in. They're millennials. Gen Z is soon to overtake them. And so I think for many reasons, how graduate schools are both targeting, identifying, and speaking to that new generation of graduate students is important. When we look at where has the shift been in terms of the platforms or the channels that we reach students, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, all outperformed. When we asked students, where are you doing your research? Those were our top 3 responses, all above Google, for what it's worth. And so I think that's an important consideration, and I'm pretty sure well above what we saw historically. Google was 49% this year had said that they utilized it. And so I don't necessarily want a graduate school to hear that and go, well, I shouldn't be on Google then, I should be on all these channels, right? I think it's important to know that you do still need to be a little bit of everywhere. But what this highlights to me is that search preference is shifting a little bit, that students are much more marketing savvy. Right? When you think about Gen Z, they have grown up with marketing being blasted at them their whole lives. So they've got great detectors for that. So I think that sincerity is important for them. And that's typically the type of thing you're going to find on YouTube. Come watch me tour my campus, right? Like that. And that's what they've experienced in going through their undergraduate years. So I always used to hear, if you're not on a particular platform as an institution, know that your students are, and they're talking about you. And so it is important to be in that space and at least understand what is being said about your institution or your program. Reddit being another example, right? We see students going there for advice and, asking questions and looking to better understand the process or their peers' experience. So again, the traditional search platforms falling a little bit further toward the back than some of those newer ones that we might expect a younger generation to be on.
Yeah, I think that's like a good, just general call out. Like marketing nowadays, people are looking much more for authenticity and less kind of like formal, sanitized commercials and, that sort of thing. And then, that idea of, with us becoming a predominant part of, I guess I say us as millennials, we're
sure
being like I would say a big chunk of the adult learner population. Social, I think, is going to be always just pervasive. I'm sure, the survey kind of continuing forward for the next several years. What those social platforms might be, again, would probably be like they kind of swap around all that. But that being a place where, we're spending a lot of time seeing information and all that. But then, like the AI search platforms and all that, like it is where it's like, what's interesting to me, like you said, I guess it's that idea of like doing a little bit of everything. One thing that's very funny, I guess, like a better term, is like what's old is new again. Like some of the like just fundamental SEO tactics of like good, clear, well-organized websites feed into these, AI search things, whether it is through Google and, its summaries and, whatever else it highlights, but just anywhere else, like, just making it, the information organized and very clear for, these other platforms to pick up on and stuff. So, it's that idea of like doing that well, showing up in social places with that kind of authentic or, organic content. And then, it's an idea of like you can maybe swap the messaging out easier now through any of these digital platforms. And it's just like, for you, your institution, your programs, your audience, you may be focusing more one place than another, but, and it might not be like you have to literally be, and do everything everywhere all at once kind of thing. But like, at least the idea of like, we've at least got our basics down in terms of like a presence that is, consistent and aligned in the Facebook meta universe, in, YouTube and, perhaps Reddit, whatever. But like, I think my biggest thing is like, you can't overlook your website, like, because that's going to be, again, now that's something that has sort of had this kind of renewed necessity in terms of it being lean, clear, and, well organized, where I think the neglect came in when like websites were becoming just a little bit too cumbersome and disorganized and all that. So
yeah, to that point, right? And again, I think this is the right. Where's the data behind that? What does the survey tell us? The idea of SEO almost becoming now the outdated, right? Like it's now AEO, right? How are you structuring your website to be fed into this answer engine optimization, right? What feeds into ChatGPT? What feeds into Gemini? And so, making sure that your website is structured in a way to have that data pulled so it can be overviewed by, a Google AI overview, right? Or ChatGPT. When we did our last survey last year, 2025, 38% of students said that they utilized AI in their search process. That number this year was 76%. That's a pretty significant jump in a year, right? Which I think says a lot about just the prevalence of AI in our lives, but two, it is telling us students are using that as part of their search. I actually work with a school currently, and if you're in admissions, if you've lived in that world, the importance of first sourcing. Right? What was that student's true origin source? And while you can kind of get some muddy waters there in identifying what a student's true first source was, we were able to see that this institution is a graduate institution. They have increased their ChatGPT first source applicants by 200% year over year, which is remarkable to me. But it also tells me, hey, there is an increasing need to better understand the content and the structure of what exists on your website and how that then is feeding into these platforms. Because if students are just foregoing getting to your website to do the search and they're using these tools that simplify the process, is your name showing up in that list? Is your name showing up when you type that query out and you get a response? And I think for some there are, and for some they're just not quite there yet. And so that's, something we like to make sure we're talking about with our partners.
Yeah, I mean, just great area of opportunity there. And I think, all things considered, I feel like, too, trying to kind of refresh on your SEO fundamentals, which now, is kind of evolving, maturing into AEO or whatever. But it's like the things that were true then are still true and can be obviously like kind of tinkered and, pivoted a little bit or adjusted. But like, I think all things considered, like that's a fairly cost-effective way to maybe see like some increased like traffic and engagement and all that is really just kind of going to your website and doing a really kind of sober look at where is the information, how is it all organized, and what can we maybe do there, maybe not isn't as expensive or take as long or be kind of as heavy as a lift. But and I think it's also a very good point there too of like where and how are these touches kind of showing up kind of in the pipeline or funnel or whatever else. But I think all really good things to be aware of for folks. And I think just we'll do kind of two similar-ish, I guess, sort of like final thoughts type questions. But we've covered a lot here. I think a lot of great action items or just ideas, things for folks to be thinking about as they're building their strategies. But just generally, what do you hope folks take away from this report? Like, what is it sort of majorly thematically telling you about this moment in terms of graduate intenders?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, very simply, right? We know what is motivating them. So I think it is important to come back to those, for lack of a better word, like the basics. Are you hitting on the things that we know are important? What's that modality? How are you conveying the return on education or the return on investment? Are you making sure that you're highlighting what type of financial investment it is for students? Because they're going to want to know. I had a conversation with a school recently, and it was, they had on their website, like, we're affordable. It's like, how are you affordable? And you've got to get specific, which again helps feed into the AI side of things, right? That'll help feed what is going into those responses. So I'd say that's an important thing. I think it's important to take away that the search process for these students is shifting a little bit, right? The platforms that they're utilizing to do that search is changing. But I also think that it's important to remember some of those tried and true channels are still, the place where you want to meet those students. I know in the report it says email first, but don't email only. And I think it's important to remember, like, we did ask these students, what's your preferred method of communication? Email was number one, but behind that was text, right? Phone calls. Those things are still just as important to students, especially those who I think have begun the process. If you've gotten that phone number from a student, make sure that you're reaching out over that channel. But they do want to receive information that they can sit on, digest, take in at their own time, and then follow up as appropriate. But you got to make sure that you're meeting that timeline, right? Are you speaking to them for more than a month or 2 months or 6 months? You've got to make sure that you're staying top of mind for that student. I guess the last thing I would say, and one of the biggest shifts that stood out to me, you look at the grad space. We've had such a significant focus on online programs over the years, and like COVID exacerbated that. Online programs have been increasing for the past 20 years. But, the majority of students in this survey said they were actually interested in hybrid programs. And we saw some pretty dramatic swings, right? That jumped to 52%. That was up 12 points over our last survey. Only 25% said they wanted online, which is actually up 15 percentage points. 22% said they wanted an in-person program, fully in person. So, again, I kind of tie that to like the AI that like this generation of students, they want to use tools that simplify the process, but they also still value that human connection. You know what I mean? Like I want to have this hybrid element where I have the flexibility to take this program, in my own time, but I also value that human connection, maybe that they lost through their COVID years, right? Especially if these are younger students who had an undergraduate focus during the pandemic. So again, there's a lot of interesting tidbits in here, but I would say those are the themes that have stuck with me in digesting some of it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's all really good stuff and good call outs. I think some of which are kind of complementary to what we were talking about, or, kind of getting into specifically that I think are also important kind of set dressings to all this. And yeah, I mean, I think it's like important when you have reports like this, like, just kind of checking your work, seeing how you kind of compare up and maybe how you can adjust things. And I mean, honestly, I do think the hybrid call out, to kind of segue to, my kind of final question here around sort of advice and stuff is like, I kind of take an honest look at that because I think it was that idea that, like kind of the advent and the continuing popularity of like, online programs, I think came at the cost, the sort of presumption that it's like, oh, all online all the time. I guess that's what everybody wants. And, it's like if you have hybrid elements or, a variety of modalities for people to choose from, like, don't hide that. Like, so like be, again, kind of adjusting, kind of tinkering, with messaging, and you might be, pleasantly surprised by the results that you get. Where, like, yeah, I think that's going to resonate on, a level with some folks who might have just been completely unaware that was something that you offered, or that is, right. They were already kind of like, intrigued and interested, but it's like, oh my god, oh you do like, because I've seen, you do like immersions, like kind of these little kind of conference, event kind of things with the program students and stuff that really are like high impact, intensive kind of things. Like, I was in roles prior that had those and students love them. So the idea that like trying to lean into market around them, could be the move. So I think, yeah, all really great stuff, but I will give you the final word here as we kind of tie everything together and wrap up the episode. Advice for other higher ed leaders navigating this moment.
Yeah. I mean, don't hesitate to reach out to us to help with your graduate challenges would be number one. But two, I mean, I think what we can infer from these types of surveys, right, is just making sure we have an understanding of how things are shifting in the market, but also remembering that there is not, I say this often to the schools that I work with, there's not a silver bullet in the graduate admission space. There's not one thing that you can do that replaces everything else. It's very much in my mind like an investment portfolio. You wouldn't put all of your eggs in one basket. It's the same way with graduate marketing. So if we know students are very interested in moving quickly in the grad space now, they're also on the channels that we know, be in those channels, but also don't forget the basics, because the basics are still important. So making sure you've got a proper communication plan that is going to meet those students where they are, and that you are in the spaces they're in, talking about the things that matter to them, right? So return on investment, speed, flexibility, all those things I've talked about plenty with you today. So that'd be my biggest takeaway.
Yeah, I mean, they are important. They bear repeating, bold, circle, underline, all that good stuff. And appreciate you sort of, welcoming outreach from folks to keep the conversation going, and ways to connect with you. And Jenzabar, Spark 451 in the episode description. And, folks obviously are certainly strongly encouraged to check out the report for themselves and kind of get all the good insights and stuff. So I'll have links for that as well. But just really appreciate you, Marshall, for hanging out, sharing out what you did, and just appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Higher Ed Geek podcast. This show is a proud member of the Enrollify Network, home to Higher Ed's largest collection of podcasts. Enrollify is where higher ed goes to grow. So be sure to check out our other podcasts, webinars, video clips, blogs, and more. Visit enrollify.org and subscribe for all the latest details and content drops directly to your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the digital workforce platform for higher ed. Learn more at element451.com.